Okay, we're talking today about Module 6 in the Natural Systems Agriculture course. And my name is Martin Entz. I'm a professor at the University of Manitoba. And let's get going by me sharing my slides. Okay, so here we have the title slide. Whoop, got ahead of myself. So what we're doing in this module is I've asked students to ask me questions that they have about the first 5 modules. And today I'm just going to answer them or address them in the best way that I can. So that's the goal of today's class. It might be a bit shorter. We'll probably review some of the material that we've covered in the past. So we're at the University of Manitoba here, located on Treaty 1 territory. You can see the map on the bottom left of your screen. Okay, so let's get right into it. The first question is comes from a farmer, and that is, how do we remove some of the onus from the producer to identify and to solve the problems alone? Several producers that I know have stated this is a barrier when examining issues such as soil health and biodiversity. They may want to make changes, but they don't know how or where to start. And so I'm going to answer that question. I think this question is relevant to every part of the world. I think the question is relevant because farmers want to make changes. They need to make changes. Their system is no longer functioning for whatever reason, and maybe it's soil degradation, maybe it's the market. But they're also getting information from a lot of places, and that may be good information, but it may not be information that's really applicable to their place, their part of the world, their farm, their part of the province, their part of the country. And so you can see on the right here, I've actually got this model, and one of the, I'm going to jump ahead and I'll come back to it, but one of the ways that is helpful to think about to get around that is to actually have research institutions or educational institutions work together with farmers to try different ideas out. And so the onus is not just on the farmer. The onus is on the farmer working together with some other farmers, like in this network here in France that you're seeing on the screen, or perhaps together with researchers. So what I like about that is when you go to farm meetings or you look at things online or on other social media, is you hear about things that are almost too good to be true. And you don't want to miss out on a great opportunity, but how do you discern whether that's really valuable for you? And working, participating in the innovation, trying things out, maybe on the farm, and working in a network where other farmers are also trying out the same things is helpful. So here, for example, this is the country of France. And this study looked at using intercropping with canola. And you can see they had 860 farmers across France who actually tried this. And that gives you a huge number. And then if you can link the information from those farmers, it really gives you a much better picture of whether something is working. It is for this reason that in Canada, living laboratories were initiated by our federal government, and they bring together farmers, scientists, and other collaborators to co-develop and test innovative practices and technologies. And so this way the farmers don't have to do everything themselves. And if they are trying something, they're going to have some scientists walk alongside them, maybe taking some measurements to tell them whether something is working. This is really really another model of the same thing. This is a particular project, which is here we are in Winnipeg. That's where I'm based. And this is a part of the prairie region of Canada where farmers are co-designing new practices aimed at net zero farming. And then the network of farmers, again, gives us a chance to come up with some kind of a consensus on what's working and what's not. And in this case, the farmers are actually putting some of that information into a model called wholeness. And so that's adding a wrinkle to this. But here's the diagram that I started off with. And this is a study from Spain where they wanted to assess how participatory monitoring and evaluation of regenerative agriculture involving local farmers and researchers enabled learning and understanding the benefits of regenerative agricultural effects among these farmers. And so what they did is they gathered farmers together and had them describe sort of some of the elements of their farm, how they saw innovation maybe happening, or which things that they would like to happen. And then the researchers developed a field manual. The farmers tried some of these things, and they got together in workshops to share experiences. And after a period of 2 or 3 years, they had a chance to evaluate those interventions better. Sorry, I'm yawning today. I apologize for that. So this is where they started with this mind map. It's called a fuzzy cognitive map of individual farms. So farmers created these, and in our course, we're going to create these a little bit later. And then they have a bunch of definitions about how the social network functions. And when we do our mind maps, we'll come back to this. And then they created, they actually put the mind maps or the fuzzy cognitive maps from all the farmers together and looked at the connections. So we've got land degradation, and it's linked to plantation design, to monoculture, to tillage, to deforestation, to chemical fertilizers, to the slope of the land, droughts. You can see all these connections. And on the left, we've got all the connections that farmers saw before they participated in this project. And then on the right here, we have the cognitive map of all the farmers after the 3 years when they've worked together. And we can see there's actually some differences. There are fewer lines connecting the different points here. And one of the things that the authors described in the paper is that's because farmers rejected some things. They thought something was going to be connected and we were going to introduce some practice and it was going to have a particular effect, and it didn't once all the farmers brought their information together. So that allowed them to create some consensus. So it's a more efficient way of figuring out how a particular practice might work by bringing the knowledge from all those farmers working together in one place. So this is, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is what people are thinking about in terms of having farmers learn through participation. Here's another figure from the paper. This is social networks of farmers involved in the project before and after they actually participated in trying some of these regenerative practices. And so what they're looking at here in the large circles, these are the farmers that participated. The orange color here are other farmers who didn't participate. Then you have NGO technicians in the green here, and you can see they're linked to a lot of different places. You can see those green lines, they're everywhere. So the technician coming in, the expert coming into the farming community was seen to be really important. And then after the farmers participated, you can see, if we look at the green lines, there's maybe they're a little less concentrated. And the farmers who are involved in the process are more linked to just regular farmers who weren't part of the project. And so they're starting to share their information, or other farmers are asking them. And so this is really about farmers trying things together. So, and having some expertise come in. And that model is, I guess, my answer to the question, how do we make, one farmer figure out everything? Now, you may remember the Weinberg model from an earlier module. And so very briefly, we have randomness here and complexity here in the model. We have three zones: organized simplicity, unorganized complexity, and the zone of systems. And I made the point that this is where farmers live. This is where farm advisors work. This is where scientists work to help people in this semi-structured system to function. So farmers live here. They're subjected to the stresses of weather, commodity prices, global events that they have no control over. They use the tools from the toolbox to design a sustainable farming system. Okay. And if we want to use, go back to the theory, where do we want to be within this box here? We want to be down on the right-hand side, because we know that diversity increases stability. At least that's a theory that often plays itself out. So this is stuff that we know from previous lectures. The point that I want to make here is that the participatory research, the participatory learning, the social learning takes place in this zone of systems. And one of the reasons why it is so good to use a practice like this to create more sustainable systems is because you're working in the part of the farm model that farmers live in. And so this is a good place to employ some of that participatory methodology. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, we could use participatory methodology to design new machines, new chemistry, new genetics. We could use participatory models to better understand events that farmers alone don't have any control about, like the weather or markets. But this is really the zone in which production agriculture functions. Now, where might you go as a scientist to try and learn something about this? Or where might you go as a farmer who's really pushing the envelope on some innovative farming system, and you want to talk to other people, maybe scientists, maybe other leading farmers? And there's not a lot of scientific meetings where that happens, but this is one of them, the Farming System Design Group. And I'm just showing you that there's a conference coming up later in 2025 on this subject. So this is a society of researchers who very much work on the whole system. Okay, I want to give you an example from Zimbabwe, where it's not a perfect example because our, knowledge of how to do this wasn't perfect at the time, but we were interested in studying intercropping together with farmers, so that we had a number of goals, and we did the work in these three regions of Zimbabwe. And the goals were to test out how well intercropping could work in a conservation agriculture system, and how farmers might feel about using it, and what were the strengths and the weaknesses. So we had these advisors work with the farmers, because that's part of that model, to bring in some new information into a community. And you can see, those of you who are familiar with conservation agriculture will see the planting pits already being dug here. We wanted to address specific challenges: the mulch scarcity, low biodiversity and rotation, limited adoption and innovation of conservation agriculture. We were working in a scenario where there was limited extension, and we also knew that in our program, we could not incentivize farmers to make changes by giving them fertilizer or seeds because we didn't have that kind of money. All we could do is really offer some knowledge. Okay, so we were reading literature where we thought there was a failure to understand where and when and for whom conservation agriculture would work. So the three objectives was to improve the sustainability and scalability of conservation agriculture, using intercrops. Okay, so that was our major goal because we knew there was a mulch scarcity, and farmers may wanted to use crop residue to feed to their livestock and not to put on the surface as mulch. So the cover crop the intercrop might provide some of that soil cover if there was no mulch. The second objective was to stimulate knowledge and co-creation and innovation. So we wanted the farmers to be help innovate in their place. And because we know that farmers have a lot of good ideas and experience is critical to developing new ideas. And so how could we enhance that innovation on the farm? Well, what we did is we actually had the farmers do little experiments on their farm. Option 3, improve the efficiency and effectiveness of extension systems. So in places in the world where we don't have, all kinds of extra extension help, we would need to have the farmers learning from each other. And so experiment with a more focused and investment-driven extension models where the farmers were invested in their innovation trials and they would be interested in talking to their neighbors and other people about it. So that was our goal in our IDRC-funded project in Zimbabwe. And again, we wanted to study the relationship between conservation agriculture and intercropping because we knew that farmers were being told to, reduce mechanical soil disturbance. That was working out pretty well. We knew that farmers were being told to put permanent organic soil cover on their fields. That was sometimes a problem because there was no mulch available. And number 3, the third principle of conservation agriculture is to have diversity. And in areas where people are wanting to grow a staple crop every year, like maize, we're not going to achieve diversification in terms of having, soybeans here one year and maize here the next year. Farmers are going to want to grow things together. So intercropping is the form of diversity that we would use. So here's Mr. Jazzy, one of the other technical advisors with the farming community. The farmers created the experiments on their farms. You've got the planting pits with no mulch, with mulch, and then you've got planting pits with no mulch, but maize and legumes intercropped. You've got maize, legume, and mulch. So we had all of these combinations that farmers tried on their fields. We looked at, different legumes. So here we have an area where the cowpeas are mulched. Here they're not mulched, and you've got less water conservation, so the legumes aren't growing as well. So these are the things that farmers are learning. So what did we, sort of get out of this experiment? Well, what are the components of the system? We used the farm-based trial as a participatory learning platform. And I love this quote from one of the participants: "My trial is my classroom where I learn to farm." So it brings in that experiential learning. We enhance the role of farmers as key players in making any technology effective for agricultural production. So the farmers are helping to develop that knowledge. We're applying agroecological principles. And here's the big one for us, or for the farmers: is instead of using inputs as incentive for farmers to adopt the practice, we used education, because education is something that we had available to us. We didn't have money for inputs, and it was quite successful. So here are some of the farmers involved with different plots. So here you can have maize, legumes, no mulch, with mulch, legumes, no mulch. You can see some very, very nice crops here. So the reason I'm showing you this is an example of what we call an ecological learning platform. We're applying science to the work, and farmers often, they want to learn about science so they can do things better. There was a social dimension to it, that farmers were learning on their own by participating, and they were learning from each other by visiting each other's fields. And it was practical. This was happening right there on the farmer's field. And that platform allowed us to provide knowledge co-creation. So what that means to me is the knowledge is partly coming from the expert who maybe makes a suggestion on a new way of enriching nutrients in these systems, but also the farmer who's learning. So this farmer, for example, was growing lab, and she realized that if she planted it at the same time as the maize, it was too aggressive, so she pruned it. And that really leads to that innovation. So we ended the project by interviewing the farmers, and this is what we learned: the impacts of intercropping, reduced labor, reduced risk, provided a living mulch for farmers who did not have mulch to put on the soil surface to reduce water evaporation. At least they could grow their own mulch they could produce more biomass, which gives you options for livestock feed. It would increase productivity because 2 crops are better than 1. The legumes would restore the soil. They would add nitrogen. The mulch was an advantage. And so the system worked even better if you had mulch. And we also learned that having an intercrop sometimes reduced the maize yield. So that was a trade-off. Now, what I wish we would have done is these cognitive maps in our project, but we never did that. Anyways, I hope this helps. This is a long way to answer the question: how do you do an innovation without putting the full onus on the farmer? Now, I'm going to excuse myself for a minute. It's a little chilly in here. I'm going to go get my scarf. Okay, thank you. I'm back. Okay, now, the next question that came up is, how would you address the problem of scale for different types of agricultural systems globally? Many of these systems share the same main issue, but may require different methods to solve them based on their specific site parameters. Yes, you have site parameters. So if you have soil that's very acidic, you're going to want to bring that pH up through some kind of a liming or wood ash. If you have soils, that have a salinity problem, let's say in Canada, that's often just a water problem. So you need to deal with the drainage in your soil by maybe growing some perennials. I did put the IUCN criteria for success in here, because when you look at the success of a nature-based idea, really what we should be doing is trying to achieve all of these, whether it's on a very small scale or a big scale. So I guess my argument is that solving problems in some cases would be scale neutral, and these should be the goals, no matter if you have a small or a large operation. And there are examples of where you do things on a small scale or a large scale, but you're really actually employing the same principles. So we've all talked about, about the push-pull system. We talked about that. So you've got that diversity. And then you've got this example in Canada where we're dealing with a 200-acre field. But we're introducing a different type of diversity here, but the principle is the same. let's take a look at conservation agriculture. I went through this earlier. The three principles are a continuous minimum soil disturbance, permanent organic soil cover, and diversification of crop species. In Canada, when we talk about conservation agriculture, we always use big machines. Well, we mostly use big machines. Here you have the same principle. Somebody is seeding directly into the stubble of the previous crop with a much smaller machine that's actually hand operated. And here you have somebody actually doing exactly the same principle, but here the seeder is being pulled with a horse. And so just like the sophisticated seeder, you've got probably the fertilizer in there, the seed in there, and the mechanism by putting the seed in the soil is very similar to that big machine. Fractals are a way to think about scale. Now, what a fractal is, it's a pattern that repeats itself no matter if you zoom in or zoom out. So this fern leaf here, this leaf, it's exactly the same shape as any one of its smaller leaves, which is the same shape as the little side leaves here. Or in the case of this tree, the whole tree is got a similar shape as this little branch here, which has the same shape as one of these end branches. And so I'm just throwing this out there to get you to use your imaginations to think about what a landscape looks like that is got enough landscape diversity to be sustainable. And can you do that at a big scale and a small scale? I would say yes, that you can. And remember, I talked about this landscape perception lab that actually takes a scientific approach to this. So think about this idea of fractals. And then the final point about scale is if you don't own your land, it's going to affect how you're going to treat that land, whether it's small or large. And I just wanted to emphasize that women's land rights are hindered by law or custom in more than 1/2 of the countries in the world. And so land ownership, especially women's rights to land, is part of this discussion. The third main question was about flowering habitat strips. We hear a lot about these in Canada right now, where in a large field, whether it's wheat or canola, is to put in a strip of native flowering plants that would attract beneficial insects, or at least that's the hope. And so let's talk a little bit about these. Do they work? Well, if we look here at this study, if we look at honeybees or wild bees, we do have the highest abundance within the wildflower strip and the crop right adjacent to the wildflower strip. Once you get into the center of the crop in the big field, sometimes those values drop off, and sometimes they don't drop off quite as much. So that's the principle, and we do see it functioning in agriculture. And of course, the question people ask themselves is, how often do I need to put one of these strips in the field to get the maximum effect? Other research has shown that it's not just the flower strip, but it's also the farming system. So here in this study, they found that both organic farming and flower strips provided functionally more diverse floral resources that allowed insect pollinators to come into the field. So the conventional farming with the flower strip was, well, they found that both the organic and the flower strips were helpful. And that's probably because the organic system would have weeds in it, which would have a more complex flower structure. And one thing we know about these floral strips is that what happens at the edge is very important. bees, for example, like the edges where one plant species ends and another one begins. So this research here, they actually looked at mowing the flower strips, and they meandered with their mowing machine to ultimately create a lot of edges. And it also talks about the fact that we have to maintain these flower strips. Plants need to be managed in a particular way so you get them to flower a lot. So mowing is one of those management systems. And crazy mowing is what I call this, gives you the most edges. And so the literature is full of this, but the literature tends to be in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's what this study is just lamenting of the meta-analyses that they looked at. Most of them were in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we need more of this research in other parts of the world. A fourth theme that came up is how do we push the envelope on intercropping? How do we go even further to really create that synergy from intercropping? And for this, I am showing you a paper from the Netherlands. This is Lorena Ditzler's work, where she's talking about pixel cropping. Right. You all know what a pixel is, right? A little dot on a computer screen, I guess. And here she's growing plants 1 meter squared of this type of species, 1 meter squared of this one. So instead of just strip cropping, which we talked about last lecture, we're talking about a much more diverse system. And so the question that she was asking is, can these highly diverse cropping systems deliver more ecological services to the farming system? And the answer is yes, it has advantages. Of course, the challenge is we can push the system really far ecologically or agronomically, how we plant the crops. The question now is how do we design the machinery to harvest this, so that we can harvest it and then separate all the seeds, or maybe some of those crops, ideally, it would be good if some of those crops were maturing at different times so we could be harvesting that same field 2 or 3 times a year. And we did talk about the winter wheat soybean relay cropping system last class. So those are questions. And one of the students mentioned that sometimes we give ourselves a pass. We don't challenge ourselves enough. And what the person meant is that we sometimes don't think of these radically diverse farming systems because we know in our minds that, well, we don't have a machine to harvest it. Or if we're designing machinery, we say, well, we're not going to design something so crazy because no farmer in their right mind would pixel crop. And so you're not getting a lot of innovation. But that's what we want to push here. Now, we don't have any machines yet that will harvest this. This would have to be done by hand today, at least to my knowledge. But I did want to share some information about harvest management if we would not pixel crop, but just strip intercrop. Okay. So, and for this, we're going to go to China, the Henan province of China, that has a lot of maize, a lot of wheat, and they do a lot of intercropping there. So they have designed equipment to properly harvest crops like maize and groundnuts, or maize and beans. And I just wanted to show you some of that equipment. Here is a harvester for maize. Here is a harvester for groundnuts. And the equipment here, they're harvesting groundnuts between the rows of maize. And here they're threshing those the maize, and you can see the rows of groundnuts. So it's not pixel farming, it's not really diverse, but it's a step toward that. When we think about this in the context of North America, we go, well, our equipment is much, much bigger than this. This is inefficient for us. But maybe instead of having one big combine harvester, we have 6 little ones, and maybe they can be automated to do this on their own. So one person can do this with a joystick. You know, it's all part of using our imagination. Seeding is a bit easier in this case. This is a seeder that seeds both corn or maize and groundnuts. And you can see here the 4 rows of maize and the 4 rows of groundnuts that have been seeded with this machine. Here's another seeding machine. And here's another picture of a peanut or groundnut harvester. So, you know, there is, we're pushing the envelope in this now, and I think in 10, 20 years, we'll have made a lot more progress. So I want to end off just with some of the contributions that students made to the discussion. I asked students who, some of the students in class to draw a farming system that would feature sort of stacking a lot of diversity things on top of each other. And now these are too far away to really understand what everything is going on here. But one of the features that all the farmers, students came up with is these strips. So when I think about is really positive in this outcome here in this homework is that there's a lot of edges. There's a lot of edges between crops, and that in and of itself lends a lot of ecological services. So these crops here in China, when you're getting a lot of edge effects, you're getting much more production out of that field because these plants really complement each other. And then I asked a number of the online students to show their farming systems. And you can see there's some real diversity within the field. There's infiltration pits. There's livestock integration with fish. Let's call fish livestock for a minute. There's cattle, there's woodlot, there's biogas. We'll come back to these. Here's another example. You can see a lot of edges, a lot of intercropping. You've got water management, you've got livestock integration. Here's another one. You've got intercropping again, you've got livestock integration, you've got a fish pond. And so you can see sort of patterns emerging in the minds and the experiences of the students taking this course. So that is it for this discussion period. I hope you enjoyed it. I will have another discussion period coming up later in the course. And so make sure that when I give you the opportunity to ask questions, you do that because we can learn a lot from what you're thinking. Okay, I wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Take care.